Welcome everybody to the Silver Busters channel. Today what we're going to be discussing is the coronavirus response and how it has become one of the most costly mistakes in human history. The response, not the virus itself, but our overzealous response that we have made for this situation. And so what we're going to get into today is the history. We are on the CDC website, the history of past pandemics. And we're going to do a little bit of math. We're going to compare those past pandemics to the current pandemic. And then we're going to see, well, what was the response then? And what was the response now? And why maybe the response now was different from the way the response was back then. So basically right now we are on the CDC website, cdc.gov. We are looking at a flu outbreak in 1957, 1958. And when you look at the death totals, the estimated number of deaths was 1.1 million worldwide and 116,000 in the United States. But but Silver Buster, hey, 116,000, that's a lot less than, what is it, up to 300,000 deaths that we have now? Well, it's not really fair, because in 1957, let's go down here, 1957, the world population was only 2.8 million people. So if I go in here to my notes, and I go to 1957 section, what does it say? It says, if we adjust, the population is now 2.71 times higher in 2020 than it was in 1957. So if the same percentage of people died, that would have put the 1957 outbreak at 314,000 deaths in the United States and almost 3 million worldwide. So basically, in 1957, we had an outbreak that killed roughly the same number of people that is going to be taken out by coronavirus. But hey, you know, I went to school. I went to history class. You think they're going to mention 2020? They're probably going to mention 2020 in the history books at some point. The whole pandemic response thing, and the whole year that we've lost due to this pandemic, right? It's probably going to come up. Nobody ever mentioned 1957 to me in the context of being a horrible year due to a virus outbreak. You know, they're probably worried about Elvis or you know, who they were dating at the time, and rock and roll, and you know, milkshakes and dancing in diners and whatever they did back in the 1950s, right? They weren't worried about dying from a flu because there were no lockdowns, there was no mass unemployment, there was no money printing, there were no massive businesses going out of large, small, and everywhere in between businesses going out bankrupt. There was no international shutdown of trade or travel. None of those things happened in 1957, even though they were confronting a problem that was equivalent to the problem that we have today. But wait, there's more. 1968 rolls around, then we get another pandemic. And it's not quite as bad this time. It was only 1 million deaths worldwide and 100,000 in the United States. But again, we have to adjust it. 1968, what was the world population in 1968? Oh, it was less than half. We're only at 3.5 billion, and now we're almost at 8 billion. So we have to adjust the numbers again. We have to get a real feel. The population is now 2.19 times higher than it was in 1968. So if we adjust those numbers, comes out to 2.19 million worldwide and over 200,000. And you kind of have to take the coronavirus deaths reporting that we get now with a grain of salt, because there is a financial bonus, a financial incentive provided to healthcare providers. They get extra money if they report somebody dying from coronavirus. You know, we had that case. The guy who dies on a motorcycle in a motorcycle accident getting reported as dying from coronavirus. And don't get me wrong, I assume a lot of people are dying from coronavirus. They're mainly elderly people. The average age of death is over 80. In a lot of cases, the average age of death is over the life expectancy of the country that they reside in. So we know who's vulnerable. We know people with pre-existing conditions, people who have, already have weakened immune systems, already have respiratory issues, people who are already sick with other things, who just can't deal with an additional thing lopped up on top of them. Ultimately, those are the people who are being taken out by coronavirus, by and large. You really don't have healthy middle-aged people coming down with this virus and dying from it. So basically, we've got, when people say it's the same as a bad flu year, this is what they're talking about. We're talking about instances where in the past, we've had bad years with the flu. And even in a normal year with the flu, we can have 50, 60, 70, 80,000, maybe 100,000 people die from the flu. But compared to what the population was back then, these were as bad or almost as bad or worse than coronavirus, depending on how we tinker with the numbers and who's getting a check to lie about them, right? And there were none of these drastic responses. There was no shutdowns. There were no lockdowns. There were no taking down of the businesses like restaurants and the travel industry. There was no international shutdown of travel, of tourism. None of those things happened in the past years. I had to ask my mom what happened in '68 because she was alive back then, and she said, "Oh, there might have been if there was a bad outbreak in a particular school, they might shut down a particular school for a period of time. But there was none of this. Oh, we have to shift everything to online learning and never go back to school again, and everybody has to stay home and watch their kids now, and we're going to upend the system." Because of coronavirus, and that was their excuse. And now, on the political side, we had this massive stimulus bill. We had all this money that was rife with fraud. We had it's supposed to be for small businesses. The PPP, Paycheck Protection Plan, was supposed to keep people working. Massive fraud. We had big businesses taking advantage of it when it was meant for small businesses. We had helicopter money. We had everybody in the world, everybody in the country getting $1,200 checks and more if you had kids just handed to them, right? None of that stuff happened in the past. And the money printing, the money that has just been brought into creation by the Federal Reserve, freshly printed money that devalues the value of your savings, of your pension plans, of your salary and your wages. All of that is devalued when the central bank prints money. We'll get into the charts later. They have printed a lot of money. And so basically, even now, let's find the right one. WHO, the World Health Organization, says they no longer support lockdowns. We in the World Health Organization do not advocate lockdowns of the primary means of control of this virus. Basically, they go on and explain it. The only time a lockdown is justified is to buy you time to reorganize, regroup, and rebalance your resources. So you remember the whole 2 weeks to flatten the curve? You remember that? Back when it was going to be 2 weeks or a month or something like that to flatten the curve? Back in March? Hello? It's November. It's darn near December. And we've got people talking about second waves of lockdowns, second wave of shutdowns. So basically they're saying the only time this makes sense is if your healthcare system is overwhelmed. And we've had a whole year, almost a whole year, to prepare. We know way more about this virus than we did back then. We know who's vulnerable. We know how to treat it better. How could we get overwhelmed by a second wave at this point? The answer is we wouldn't be overwhelmed by a second wave at this point. If they want a second wave, it's for some other reason. It's a convenient excuse for some other purpose. And we'll get into that. So basically, if, as I've shown you, we've had problems like this in the past, and the government has done nothing. Nothing. No money printing. No checks. No shutdowns. No lockdowns. They've done nothing. Why did they do it this time? Why? Okay. Well, let's go back and look for the, not the Fed balance sheet, the repo rate. Okay. What do you need to know about the repo rate? The repo rate is an interest rate that banks charge each other. It's a short-term overnight interest rate. It's something that you just do to balance the books, to make sure everything is lining up with, to satisfy other accounts that are coming due, you know, something like that. And as you can see, this repo rate is fairly stable. You know, it's not a high interest rate. It's like around 2%. And then you got this massive spike in September here. And so why would banks stop trusting each other? Why would banks, you know, force this really high interest rate on people to get these overnight loans? You know, if banks don't trust each other, does that mean somebody is not getting paid? That somebody is not doing what they're supposed to be doing? That there's some kind of shenanigans, that they're trying to hide losses, that they're shuffling things? Is that why we got this big spike? Well, anyway, if we go down here, it says, the Fed blamed this, the Federal Reserve, which is a central bank, blamed this on technical factors. Oh, corporate tax payments were due, blah, blah, blah. But when we go down here, they say, if that's the case, the Fed would have stabilized the market. In reality, the Fed has continued to inject cash into the repo market. So they kept doing it. And this says for 3 months. And the reality is, went past the length of this article. They kept doing it the whole time. So let's get in here and look at the Fed balance sheet. So what caused this problem back here in the September timeframe, right? September of last year. Look at this chart. This is the Fed balance sheet. This is base money. This is the money. This is where money starts its life. You know, the root of all money is base money. Here's the 2008 crisis, the whole Great Recession, the housing crash. All the money printing that started in 2008. Here's all the quantitative easing programs, QE1, QE2, QE3. And then finally we plateau out here as we get to some kind of sense of normalcy in the later years. And then they start trying to, they bought their own Kool-Aid, you know, and they started drinking, and they believed all these measures we took back here, this was all temporary. This was all emergency powers. We can come back from this. We can normalize interest rates. And the whole time along here, they were raising interest rates. You know, as soon as Trump got in, they started raising interest rates, right? and then they started taking money out of the system in 2018 and 2019. When did they stop? Oh, does that look like it might be around September of 2019? I mean, it's not 100% accurate, but it almost looks like maybe that's why they had to stop right there, that this was going down, that they were draining money out of the system. These banks needed that money, turns out, you know, to keep their whole funny money lie going. They needed that money. But the Fed was taking it away, and they had to reverse course, and they were already reversing course before coronavirus struck. But man, when coronavirus struck at the top of the 2020, boom, look at all this money creation. And then it kept going up. And after the election, when they finally decided who's won and who's going to actually sit in Congress, there's probably going to be another big pile of money that they throw on the system, right? Another big pile of money. They've done more in this short little period of time than they did in the entire crisis period, the entire response to the housing market crash. They have added more money, and anytime they add money, it takes money out of your paycheck, out of your savings, out of your salary, out of your pensions that you earned. This money, when you just print it, it doesn't have its own value. It has to take it from the value that exists in the pre-existing dollars. So all of this money that they've created, going all the way back from, you know, maybe 1 trillion or less than 1 trillion to over 10, to over $10 trillion. And this is base money. This is before it goes into the fractional reserve banking system and gets multiplied. And I'll touch on that later. But this is a massive amount of money that has been created in response to coronavirus. Or was it? Was it in response instead to this tapering, this wanting them to make believe that they had all of these problems fixed, that we don't need to print money? That was all temporary. We have everything under control. We are a legitimate, stable authority, but we know what we're doing, and we're not just printing money and handing it to rich fat cats so they can stay rich and powerful, even though they've made major mistakes managing the currency and the government and business in general. You know, think about what an ideal leadership class would be. An ideal leadership class would be a meritocracy, right? They wouldn't just follow the same rules that I have to put up with or a hobo has to put up with down at the bottom of the system, right? They should rise to a higher standard than me and you, right? They should be held more accountable because they're supposed to be the smart ones. They're supposed to be the ones that we trust with all the levers of government, all of this power. We trust them with immense amount of power. The power to print money, which is basically the power to steal purchasing power from anybody else who's holding the currency right now and to give it to someone else without Congress ever passing a law or passing a bill. They can just decide, hey, we're printing some money today and we're giving it to them, and we're printing some money and we're giving it to them. And when they do that, they're taking it from you. Because if you're watching this, you're probably not one of the people receiving some of this trillions of dollars that was created in response to coronavirus. You might get your $1,200 check in the mail, and you might get some unemployment benefits and some PPP funds, but your share, you're nowhere near. This is going to big banks. This is going to big corporations. This is going to the big boys to make up for their own screw-ups, to make up for their own past. This is an unstable system, and they have to keep printing money to keep themselves in this loop, right? They can't run an honest system. They can't keep a stable system. They can't do it without cheating. Printing money is cheating. Once you have printed money and bailed people out and handed it out, you've already lost. You're not at that top position anymore. You're not the responsible, capable leadership that you made yourself out to be. If you needed all of this to keep your yachts and to keep your big positions on boards and to keep your businesses moving, that means you are a failure. You have failed. And in a real capitalist system, what would happen when you fail? You would go bankrupt. Your assets would be sold off at a fire sale, and more capable, more intelligent people would get their shot. The people who had assets in reserve, the people who actually read the market the right way, they would get the power. They would become the new business leaders. The old ones, the old cronies in their mansions, they'd have to sell them off. They'd have to sell their yachts. They'd have to stop contributing to politicians' re-election campaigns and getting all of that influence and power. But instead, they're like, no, we like power. We like staying on top. We like living in the Hamptons and going to fancy French restaurants when everybody else is on lockdown. Yes, Governor Newsom of California, I am looking at you. Governor Newsom and your crony lobbyist and the major health officials of the land who were discussing lockdown orders for you, the little people. They were at a French restaurant. 3 Michelin stars, which is the highest that you can get. $350 a plate minimum before they bring out the vintage wine. The wine is extra. 12 of them gathered. No masks, no social distancing, not outside. We have the photograph. I don't have it right at hand, but you Google Google Newsom restaurant. You'll find it. Breaking every rule in the book, every tactic that they use to get you afraid to not look at this, to ignore this, get you hiding at home and afraid. This is what they were doing the whole time. They didn't want you to see this because this is what keeps them on top. This is what keeps them powerful. This is what devalues your wages and gives them power. Because as long as they have the ability to print infinite money, they don't have to worry about anything. They don't have to work hard and make good choices. They can live off of your back, and not even in the surplus value sense that a socialist might say. That this is just taking what you've already legitimately earned through your wages. This is just stealing from the power of your savings and stealing from the power of your pension, right? When they print this fresh money, and this is before it goes into the fractional reserve system. Let's say there is some kind of recovery, right? It's not going to be just this 10 trillion. This is base money. And the reason why it's called base money is it can go through the fractional reserve system. And typically, when we're talking about a fractional reserve banking system, they only need to keep about 10% of the money that you deposit with them. The rest they can loan out. And then it chains. When Bob gets a loan from Bank 1, he deposits it in Bank 2 so he can pay contractors. And those contractors put it in Bank C, and their workers put it in Bank D. And every time they put in a deposit, it becomes someone else's reserves. So those banks can make more loans on the back of those reserves. So once you get to the end of that chain of deposits in a circle like that, this number, this 10 trillion number, can be 10 times higher. So you think, oh, well, there's no inflation now, or inflation's under control. Well, first off, the CPI number is bogus, but that deserves a whole video dedicated to itself. But look at all this dry powder. This dry powder can get into the system anytime it wants. I mean, it's already in the system if you're looking in the right places. There's already shortages. There's already price increases for necessities, right? And we're getting none of the benefits from technology. You know, the benefits of technology where efficiency should be lowering prices every year. Efficiency should be making food cheaper, should be making housing cheaper, should be making transportation cheaper. All of these things. I mean, I can get a flat screen TV cheaper. Why aren't I getting the benefit from technology and automation and all these other areas? Because they're inflating the currency constantly. And they're doing it. They use the coronavirus response. They use a response that, you know, the WHO believes should only be used in extreme cases to avoid a healthcare system from being overwhelmed. And we've had a whole year to prepare for that. There's no way they should be overwhelmed at this point. We shouldn't have a lockdown in any situation. And Governor Newsom sure isn't afraid of catching coronavirus. He's having a fancy French dinner with 12 people and his lobbyists celebrating their birthday, while you can't go to church, or you can't go to a funeral for a loved one, or you can't be by their side. All the things they've taken for you, they're not afraid of it because they know it was just a big game. They needed an excuse. You know, they didn't do a response back in '68 like this. They didn't need to print the money back then. They couldn't print the money back then. They were on a gold standard back then. They didn't have that option. But now, oh boy, now they got that money in sight. They really want it. And like I said, they don't want to be held accountable. They want to live on easy street. When you screw up, you feel the pain. You lose your car, you lose your house, you lose your savings. You lose your standard of living. When they screw up, when they mismanage a system, they get bailed out. They just hand that money out to whoever they want. Right? Right? Shouldn't they be held to a higher standard? If you're going to be a leader, if you're going to set an example, if you're going to justify all the control and power that you have, don't you have to be better than other people, not worse than other people, and get bailouts, and get fresh currency handed to you, stolen. So, if you can see this here, they didn't do this coronavirus response, the style in the past. They did it now because they needed to print money. How do we break out of this system? How do we break out of a system that's controlled by the amount of money that they can print anytime that they want to bail out of their problem? How do we hold them accountable? Well, it's not by a voting. Let's get that clear. No matter if you voted for Trump or Biden, this kind of thing is going to keep going. This thing is going to keep going. No matter if it's Republicans or Democrats, Biden or Trump, doesn't matter. You have to break the system. And you can break it by where you put your money. And instead of putting your money into something that can be printed infinitely, or putting it in locked up 401ks and pensions where you can't control the way it's invested. The big boys control how it's invested. You don't get to choose. You have to take the power in your own hands. You have to buy silver. Why would you buy silver? And I'm not here to sell it to you. Google buy silver, or you can ask me in the comments what's the best way to buy silver. I'll give you some options because I just don't want you to get scammed. But I'm not selling it to you, right? How do you get silver? And how does silver break the system? Silver is a very small market, and it's primarily, the price on it is primarily set through futures markets trading. And it's one of those systems where 500 times more paper contracts exist than the underlying asset, which is the actual bars of silver. Because there's a lot of people out there that think that they can ask for gold or silver anytime they want. You know, I've got this sheet of paper that says I'm allowed to have this much gold and silver. That's not in the vaults. There's not that much in the vaults, right? They can't print silver. They can go mine it, but they can't mine it this fast. You know, they can't mine it as fast as they can print money. So if you take physical possession of physical silver and you hold it in your hands, you take money out of their system and bring it back into the real world and demand accountability for what they've done with all of this money printing, that's the shortest distance between taking away this power that they think that they can keep over you. These illegitimate elites who have screwed up and screwed up and screwed up, but they want to take the money out of your hide, out of your pay, out of your pensions, out of your salary. When they screw up, they want to keep it for their yachts, for their mansions, for their power, so they can keep donating funds to these big companies and keep themselves up on top. That's what they want. If you get something that they can't control, something that's outside their system, and you break their system that they've used to manipulate it, their fractional reserve system, that's how we take this power away from the elite. And we need to take it away, or the division between the rich and poor is just going to get worse. You're going to get the crazies on one side or the other, and they're going to do something drastic. And to avoid that, we have to get this. We have to get this away from them. This is money that should be more evenly distributed throughout the system, and it's not. This is why they think, oh, capitalism has failed. This is not capitalism. This is a central bank intervention on a government level, on a centralized level. This is not, mom and pop going to their bank and putting a CD in and getting 5 or 10% interest on their CD. No, this is intervention. This is central planning. This is socialism on a certain type. It's not Marxism, but it is certainly socialism of a type. And this is dangerous. And this is not helping the little guy. No matter what they tell you, no matter how much of a check they give you, their share is always bigger than yours. And it's going to stay that way unless you do something about it. This has been the Silver Busters channel, and I'm signing off.